مبروك من قلبي بقولها لكم
مبروك من قلبي بقولها لكم
والفرح الله يتممها لكم
والفرح الله يتممها لكم
مبروك من قلبي بقولها لكم
مبروك من قلبي بقولها لكم
والفرح الله يتممها لكم
والفرح الله يتممها لكم
وانتوا يا حلوين عقبالكم اغني لكم يا صلاة الزين
مبروك مبروك ألف مبروك 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 ألف مبروك
مبروك من قلبي بقولها لكم
مبروك من قلبي بقولها لكم
والفرح الله يتممها لكم
والفرح الله يتممها لكم
مبروك من قلبي بقولها لكم
مبروك من قلبي بقولها لكم
والفرح الله يتممها لكم
والفرح الله يتممها لكم
وانتوا يا حلوين عقبالكم اغني لكم يا صلاة الزين
مبروك مبروك ألف مبروك 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 ألف مبروك
قالوا القمر جميل في سماء
قالوا القمر جميل في سماء
قالوا الشجر جميل في رباء
قالوا الشجر جميل في رباء
قالوا القمر جميل في سماء
قالوا القمر جميل في سماء
قالوا الشجر جميل في رباء
قالوا الشجر جميل في رباء
قالوا القمر جميل في سماء
قالوا القمر جميل في سماء
قالوا الشجر جميل في رباء
قالوا الشجر جميل في رباء
قالوا الزهر حلو يا محلاه قلت انا ما شفت انا قلت انا ما شفت انا اجمل من العروسين
مبروك مبروك ألف مبروك 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 ألف مبروك
قالوا القمر جميل في سماء
قالوا القمر جميل في سماء
قالوا الشجر جميل في رباء
قالوا الشجر جميل في رباء
قالوا القمر جميل في سماء
قالوا القمر جميل في سماء
قالوا الشجر جميل في رباء
قالوا الشجر جميل في رباء
قالوا الزهر حلو يا محلاه قلت انا ما شفت انا قلت انا ما شفت انا اجمل من العروسين
مبروك مبروك ألف مبروك 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 ألف مبروك 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 ألف مبروك 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 ألف مبروك 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 ألف مبروك
Interview with Anne Jennings, author of Nubian Women of West Aswan. Welcome, Anne.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
What sparked your interest in Nubia?
Well, I was a graduate student and I was interested in the status of women in Muslim societies. but I was not sure exactly which Muslim society that I wanted to study. So I took a trip and we went to Egypt and other places as well, other Muslim countries. And we found a hotel on the West Bank near Luxor, near the Colossi of Memnon. There was a little hotel there that still could be there, I don't know. But we settled in there, and the women of that hotel, they saw me and they sort of took me in, and they would bring me to their rooms and they would try to talk to me even though they didn't speak any English and I didn't speak any Arabic at that time. But they tried to talk and communicate with me. They sang songs, they danced for me, they gave me tea and all of that. And I was just so charmed by their openness and their friendliness. When I went back to California, I was speaking to a fellow student about that. And he said, well, what do these women look like? And I described them. And he said, well, these could be Nubians, because the Nubians have the reputation in Egypt of being the most hospitable people there. So I began to read about Nubians. And I realized that, at least in the anthropological literature, there wasn't at that time very much about Nubians at all. And there was nothing about Nubian women at all. So I thought, well, this is an opportunity for me to contribute to the literature on Nubians and Nubian women. So that's how I got started.
Okay, when was that?
We took that trip in the 1970s.
Okay.
In 77, sometime like that, about 77.
So how did you view that experience? Because you mentioned a bit about, like, it obviously had an impact on you, but, you know, how did you view it in terms of what your life had been like before, like your life in America, and then experiencing this with the Nubian women in Egypt?
Yeah, I never had experienced that kind of friendliness before. You know, that kind of openness before, the kind of willingness to try to communicate with somebody who didn't even speak their language, you know, like their curiosity about me and all that. I'd never experienced that before, so that was an eye-opening experience. Then I went back in 1981. That's when I did my first field work, 1981 to 82.
Okay, and which part did you go to?
Well, at first I went to Cairo, and I studied Arabic there for a summer. It was just like 2 months in Arabic, but I spent about 4 or 5 months altogether in Cairo. Maybe longer than that, because that was the year that Sadat was shot.
Yeah.
And so they prevented people from moving around Egypt. And I was planning to go down to Egypt, I think, in September of that year. But I couldn't. I had to wait for another month, so I didn't get down to Aswan, until October.
Okay, so when you were in Cairo, did you meet the Nubians in Cairo, around Abdeen and around there?
No, very few.
Okay.
You know, I didn't meet that many Egyptians either, really. You know, I felt very isolated from, you know, there were many Americans and English-speaking people in Cairo. But I felt isolated from the Egyptians and from the Nubians, too.
Well, you're just mostly with the people at the American University in Cairo.
Yeah, and people who I met. There are many people from Europe and from America who are living in Cairo. Many more than I expected, expatriates there.
Yeah.
And so I met several of them, and I sort of hung around in the expatriate community. And there are many American black people living there, so I sort of hung with them.
Okay, so tell us about your experiences when you actually get to the Nubian areas.
Okay, I went down to Aswan, and I checked into a hotel, and I started walking around Aswan. And I went into the Aswan Palace of Culture. Did you go into that? It has, you know, the map of Aswan and the Nubian villages and some information about them on the walls. And in the evening they have a dance group.
Yeah.
Did you see that?
Yeah,
dance
we went
group?
in the centre, but and the man took us round, and it's got the library in there. When we were walking down the road towards the museum.
Yeah. And so I was standing there looking at the maps and things, and some of the young women who were actually in the folkloric dance troupe came up to me. And they started talking to me. They wanted to find out who I was and why I was there and all of that. And they didn't speak any English either. But by that time, I had learned some Arabic in Cairo, so I was trying to communicate with them. It was difficult, but we did. And so they invited me home to meet their mother, And so I would visit them every 2 or 3 days, They said, come back, come back, come back and visit. So finally, the mother said, you really should move in with us. You shouldn't be living in a hotel by yourself. You should move in with us. And she said that. I thought that she was just being polite, I said, okay, yes, sure. But she said it like 4 or 5 times. And so that's when I figured, okay, so she must be serious. So I did that. I moved in with them. And I lived with that family for about a month and a half or so. And I learned how to speak Arabic more because none of them spoke English at all. But I met a lot of different people. They were all young people in this folkloric dance troupe. So they were all artists, singers, dancers, creative people.
Okay. Did they speak Nubian languages?
Some of them did. Some of them were Nubians, but not all of them.
Okay.
Like the family that I lived with, they were Sudanese. They were not Nubians.
Okay.
I told them that I was interested in the Nubians, and they said, well, we're not Nubians, but we know Nubians. And so they introduced me to people a guy who finally took me to his family in one of the villages there. In fact, in West Aswan, this is where his family, part of his family lived.
Okay, and what was it like out in West Aswan?
Oh, it was wonderful. I loved it. I'd gone around to many of the villages in that area just looking. And you may know that many of the Nubians had been moved from further south when the Aswan High Dam was built. It flooded out all of the Nubian villages south of the High Dam. Mm-hmm. So they moved all of those people north to Kamambo, which is north of Aswan. So I went up to Kamambo and I met the Amda there, and I looked at the village there, but I didn't like it. It was ugly, frankly. It was an ugly village.
It's like a kind of practical living village.
Yeah, right. And it's like the people who built the village had no knowledge of Nubian culture. Yeah. Like they'd never been to a Nubian village, so they just built the kind of house that they felt Egyptians should live in. It's ugly, and so I didn't want to live there. But then I visited West Aswan, and it's just a beautiful village. The houses are beautiful, they're decorated, and the people are very nice. And so finally, eventually, one of the women of that village invited me to move in with her family. So that's how I came to live there.
You get very lucky with people.
I think it's because they're that way.
Yeah, and also because you show an interest, but a genuine...
Yeah, and I was exotic to them. I'm an American, and a black American. So I think that they were interested in me as much as I was interested in them.
So, like, when you're there, how were you funding yourself?
Oh, I got a grant. The first time I got a grant from my university, University of California in Riverside. And then the second time I was there, I got a postdoctoral grant, so I could go back there.
So tell us about your books.
The first book is called The Nubians of West Aswan, and it was published, I believe, in '95. And it basically is an ethnography. I talk about how I met the Nubians and what I learned. I was interested in what the Nubian women did, their daily lives, their daily routine.
So was the focus more on women? Because you said that from the start, on like women's lives. And
Yeah, right. And so that's what that book is about, basically.
Okay, so just like going through their lives, their daily lives, their ceremonial lives and things like that.
Right, and their lives as young women and then married women and then old women as well. There's a chapter about that in the book too. And I do have a chapter about the men because I did learn some things about men's life. So I have a chapter about the men too.
Okay, and the second book?
The second time I went back there was in 1986. And that's when I took my dissertation back to them. I got a postdoctoral grant. I took my dissertation back to them for them to look at, and I wanted to make sure that I was accurate, in the things that I had said. And I also learned a lot more, so that when I did finally write my book, which was published in '95, it was more comprehensive and all of that. And then after that, I went back in '97. And that was just for a visit. It wasn't to write anything. I just wanted to see the people, and to show them the book, to bring them copies of the book so they'd know, they'd have in their hand what they'd understand what I was there doing, just in case. They may have understood it before, but I wanted to make sure that they understood what exactly I was doing there. And so that was '97. And then after that, I didn't go back for 10 years. So I went back in 2007, and again, it was just to say hello, and I noticed so many changes just in the 10 years. Now we all know that societies change and cultures change, but I just didn't expect it to be so different. And at that time, I met groups of people, the groups of tourists coming into the village, and my main informant, whose name is Zuba, would always show them the book that I had written. And so I realized that book was out of date. They were reading about what I'd written, but it wasn't accurate anymore, really.
So 20 years old.
Yeah,
almost.
right. It just wasn't accurate. So I grew ashamed. I said, oh my goodness, this information, I'm giving out this information and it's just not true, So I thought, okay, it's time to write another book and update it. So then that's why I wrote the second edition, Nubian Women of West Aswan.
Okay, so how have those books been received?
Oh, very well, very well. They're used mainly in anthropology courses. And I tried to write it so that if you were teaching Introduction to Cultural Anthropology, if you were teaching an introductory women's course, if you were teaching a course about peoples of Africa, if you were teaching a course about people in the Islamic world, you could use my book in each of those classes, That's what my purpose was. And so, people have been using the book. And I'm sure many people have bought it for their own interest. But I think mainly it's been used in college courses.
Okay. Was it translated into Arabic?
Not yet. I left a copy of it with someone who said that he would translate it, but I don't know if it has been. But the American University in Cairo does have copies of my book, and they are selling them in Cairo.
So the Nubians themselves, were they more looking at their lives now as like how they are now as Muslims, or did they talk a lot about the ancient history?
The people who I knew did not know that much about ancient history. These are villagers with limited education. Now, the ones who went on to college, they would come back to the village from time to time, they knew about their heritage, or they knew about the ancient Nubian kingdoms and all that. But I don't think that the people who stayed in the village really they may have had an interest in it, but they didn't know that much about it. One of the older women, we were talking about the pyramids one day, and she said, well, the Jews built the pyramids. And so that's the kind of knowledge that they had.
Okay, so that's just like straight out of the Bible or straight out of the Quran.
Yeah, okay.
Like the Jews built it as slaves of wicked Egyptian pharaohs, kind of.
Is that in the Quran too?
I assume something like that must be.
Okay. Yeah, well, that's what she'd learned.
Yeah.
So. And, I tried to talk about how the ancient Egyptians were Nubians, but I'm not sure that she was ready to accept that. However, many of the educated Nubians in Cairo, they do know that, and they say, there's been recently a controversy when a racist thing was said, and Nubians became very upset about it, so I'm told. And one of the things the Nubians would say was that we are the original Egyptians, so you need to stop disrespecting us.
I know that issue came up when they were talking about selling off like artifacts and things, right? And one set of people, maybe like the Egyptian Museum of Antiquities, right, would say anything that's found is supposed to come through us, and we decide on provenance and ownership and where it's going to stay. And like Nubians would say, well, hold on a minute, it was found on the territory which our people have lived on for millennium. We can dispose of it the way we want. If we want to keep it, we keep it. If we want to just sell it to anybody we want to sell it to, then we can just sell it. But like, you know, the museum in Cairo was saying no, like it's government property from its, you know, from its ancient history. It must be government property. We must have a look at it, even if just to catalogue it. But you know, so you know, did you hear any of that kind of?
I did not. No.
Okay,
No, I
okay, yeah.
didn't.
That's a big controversy that's been going on, because it's like, it's that thing of like, you know, if you find something on your land, why do you have to tell the government about it?
Well, first of all, it is government land. That's what I found out also. All of the land of Egypt is owned by the government, so that people cannot really, they don't have private property. You know, it's all owned by the government. It's like Mexico. You know, in Mexico also, you can buy houses, but the land itself you cannot actually buy. You know,
So
because
anything
it's
that's
owned by the government.
so anything that's under that land is government.
Belongs to the government. Yeah, and I
Yeah.
believe it's the same in Egypt. So that may be what they're talking about.
So how do the Nubians see their current situation?
Well, that I learned from other people. I learned from other anthropologists who are actually based in Cairo and are talking to Nubians in Cairo. And evidently they're feeling really disrespected. You know, they're feeling like the government is ignoring them. And certainly, you know, the government is saying that everybody who lives in Egypt, we're all Egyptians. You know, basically they're denying the existence of ethnic groups in Egypt. And there are several ethnic groups in Egypt, not just Nubians, but a lot of other people. And the ethnic groups in Egypt tend to hold on to their ethnic identity. So like the Sudanese that I told you about, they said we're Sudanese, even though they were born in Egypt and their parents were born in Egypt, you know, but ethnically they're Sudanese, and so they consider themselves to be Sudanese, not Egyptians. You know, those are Egyptians, we're Sudanese. And then that's what the Nubians say too, we're Nubians. You know, those people, they're Egyptians, we're Nubians. So they do have a strong sense of their own ethnic identity, and they're very proud of it. You know, and they don't like the fact that, for instance, the government doesn't want them to speak Nubian anymore. You know, even though they are slowly losing the Nubian language, because all of the schools are taught in Arabic. So really they're forced to learn Arabic and to use Arabic in daily life. And some of them don't care, but others do care. You know, they want to maintain their language.
Obviously, I mean, if the government is coming and instituting it's almost like an Arabization kind of policy,
what it is, yeah.
then the way governments work is like every single institution of the state then follows that kind of government edict. So as soon as you start trying to interact with the state, they will be saying, no, you must think like this, you must talk like this. It's that kind of thing that they're feeling,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So that marginalization, that's like from Alexandria to the border, right throughout. So even in the areas that were traditionally theirs, right? I mean, more Aswan and South.
Yeah,
Even in
yeah.
those areas, they're still feeling the Arabization
Oh,
policy.
yes, they are. Yeah, that's true.
What's the livelihoods? I mean, how can they make money in the like West Aswan, down that side, going further south? What do they use for income?
Well, many of them are still farmers, so they do have some food from the land, but they can't live on that. You know, they can sell their food in the marketplace, which they do, but again, they can't live on that. But they can get something from their land. But not everybody has a lot of land to grow food on. But they can get jobs, if possible, in Aswan. Traditionally, the Nubian men would leave their villages and go to Cairo or to Alexandria or even abroad in order to make money. And then they'd send money home to their families in Aswan or in the villages. So some still do that. Some go to Saudi Arabia or go to the Gulf and work and send money home.
So the men are like a migrant remittances.
Yes, they are. But that seems to have been coming to an end, so for some reason, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, they're sort of sending migrant workers back to their home.
When I see a lot of the programs about Dubai and the Arab Emirates, there's a lot of workers who seem to now come from Pakistan, Bangladesh, going out further east that way. So maybe they've decided that.
Yeah, maybe they're cheaper, maybe they don't have to pay them as much, So people are coming back and looking for jobs, and I think it's going to be a problem for the Egyptian government, because they're having a very hard time as it is even finding jobs for Egyptians, much less for the various ethnic groups.
The principle behind the Aswan Dam and like all its extensions was that this was supposed to make Egypt viable, and this was supposed to provide jobs and everything because of, like, obviously before land was only fertile during a certain period of time. And so the dam was supposed to be this great economic engine.
Yeah.
So,
Well, they have irrigated a lot more land than they used to have. So they've got a lot more crops growing. That's true.
is it just that the growing population is outstripping what even the Aswan Dam can cater for?
I think a lot of people don't want to stay on the land. Young people, they don't want to be farmers. They want to go into Cairo, and find jobs in Cairo.
Okay.
So that's a problem. So even though the government is irrigating more land, and there is a lot more farmland than there used to be, and also maybe it's industrial farms too. So they don't need a lot of people to work with.
Right, big mechanization.
Yeah, what's up? This is Chuck D for Kabara and NUBIART right here. This is Chuck D, Public Enemy #1. Keep it locked. Yeah, NUBIART right here. This is Chuck D, Public Enemy #1. Keep it locked.
Well, I said big up Kubara and the NUBIART show, giving a different perspective on Africa and the African world. Love.
How do the women view the changes that have happened over the last, say, 4 or 5 decades?
I get the impression that they're okay with the changes. Before they moved from the Nubian homeland, before the high dam was built, life was very difficult there. They didn't have any electricity, so that means there was no refrigeration, right? There were no electric lights at night. Women had to go down to the river twice a day and bring water in pails on their heads. Twice a day they had to do this. Imagine doing that. Women worked very, very hard. They were farming people, so they had to create meals from scratch. They had to go out and dig them up and bring them home and grind the grain for bread and all of these things. So life was much more difficult then. Now that they've moved, they have much more. They have electricity, which means refrigeration, which means they can keep food fresher longer. Now they've got stoves rather than having to cook over fire pits. They have hot and cold running water in their bathrooms. They have bathrooms. There's just a lot of things that I see as improvements. Okay. It's true that they've lost their homeland. That is true, and that's a negative, for sure. But there's so much positive that people don't really think about when they think about the high dam, moving people further north.
How do they, like as women, right, the loss of their customs and that, how do they view that? Because obviously, there's certain customs that are maybe particular to women. So, yeah, how do they view that? Or are they happy with those changes because they just see it as modernization?
Well, some of them do and some of them don't. Some of them see it as modernization, but some of the customs remain. They still have some customs, like wedding customs, for instance, funeral customs. They're still doing those things, So some customs remain, but it depends on who you talk to. And the younger women, well, of course, the younger women have had some education, too. They've gone to high school, they've gone to college, so they may see modernization as a good thing. Whereas the older women may bemoan the fact that, they're losing certain kinds of things.
Okay. Do they practice circumcision?
Yeah, they do. At least they did when I was there the first time. Now, I talked to a younger woman who was a child when I was there the first time. Now she's married and she has a daughter of her own. So I asked her, I said, well, are you going to circumcise your little girl? And she said that there's been talk in the village against it. So she just wasn't sure whether or not she was going to do it. She hadn't made up her mind yet. So that, to me, was a positive thing. At least there's talk against it now in the village, but there wasn't before.
So what age were they getting circumcised?
The kid was about, no, much younger than that. Maybe 3 months, 4 months old,
Okay,
something
so
like that.
it's just almost after birth. Soon
Yeah. They didn't wait until the child was 7 years old. Oh no, much among the Nubians, it's much younger than that. Okay. And so I'm not really sure right now how many of the younger women are doing that still, or whether they've put that custom aside.
Was there national campaigns against circumcision?
Yeah, there were. Okay. And people talked against it, and probably on TV. I didn't see any, but there probably were, TV, and there were doctors. There's certainly a couple of hospitals in Aswan that talked against it. But, you have to remember that in something like circumcision and infibulation, it was originally to protect women, and it meant that it kept them virginal until they got married. So that way the man knew that the woman that he was marrying was a virgin. So if he can't be sure anymore that the woman he's marrying is a virgin, does that change his attitude towards her? And at least in the olden days, if it were known that a family decided not to circumcise and infibulate their little girls, it meant that family was shunned, that they were made fun of. The children, the little girls couldn't get married, and in a situation like that, marriage is very important to women. It has to do with economic security. It has to do with social status. So the primary directive for women, at least in traditional times, was to get married and have children. So infibulation and circumcision protected that. You know what I'm saying? So if we're talking about not doing it anymore, what does that mean for the protection of women? And not only women were affected, but the brothers of the girls that were not circumcised were also made fun of. What's wrong with your sister? That kind of thing, which is an honor thing, right? So the whole family is affected, not just the woman that's refusing to be circumcised. So that's something we have to remember when we're talking about ending this custom.
Yeah, it does change the relations between the people.
Yeah,
and also, I suppose if if certain people are still staying strong to circumcision and other people aren't, then obviously for people to get married, it's more that they have to start marrying outside of their social group that they would have, or their clan or whatever that they would have been tight with before.
Yeah, depending, and then if we're talking about women marrying other men from outside. Well, Nubians don't like that. Nubians don't want their little girls marrying outsiders. That's the first thing. And then who are they going to get married to? Who are these guys? And then those guys may prefer circumcised women too. So it may turn out that this young woman will never get married. Is that what we want? We don't want that. So it's a problem, that's all.
Okay. Is male circumcision still practiced?
I don't know. I don't know if men, do Muslims circumcise men? Okay, then it is.
What do the Nubians feel about, say, outsiders coming, like Africans from, who are interested in Nubians, but only in Nubian history and not they don't really kind of see the Nubian situation today and got their blinkers on. All they want to talk about is the 25th dynasty or something like that. And the Nubians are saying, look, I'm here in front of you. This is my situation I want to talk to you about. Yeah, how do they feel about that?
I didn't hear any discussions about that. It may be, also, I think it may be that many of the Africans who come into that area are males. and they talk to male Nubians. And since I was a woman, I didn't have that much discussion with the males, you know.
Okay.
Sometimes a foreign woman would come through, but they would not talk about ancient history, at least as far as I could tell. You know, they were more interested in what Nubian women were doing now. Oh, I didn't mention another way of making money is tourism. That's very important to the Nubian villages now. And women are involved in tourism as well as men. And women can make their own money from tourism.
What form does that tourism take?
Tour groups are brought to the villages by men, you know. They usually, one of the males of the family is either a tour group leader or he's got a boat in which he takes tour groups around and he brings tourists in groups in his boat to the village, and he generally takes them to one of the houses of one of his sisters. And the sister welcomes tour groups into her house. She serves them tea, you know, and then she allows them to walk around their house. Now, you've seen Nubian houses, you know what they're like. They're just outstanding, right? Okay. So a lot of tourists have never seen anything like this.
And then they've got all like the crafts, all the thatch crafts, and like there's a lot of necklaces, and then also what they were doing was painting henna and charging
all
for
of these
henna
things.
painting.
Yeah, right. All of these things. The women make money from all of these things. You know, so, and this is very important to the village. Now, nowadays, when the last time I was there in 1997, there was no Nubian tourist village, or whatever it was called. People actually came into the homes of the people in the village. Nowadays, it's different, and that's what I'm talking about in my presentation here, as a matter of fact, that the changes in the way they handle tour groups from 1997 to 2007.
Is there a problem with that, though, in that then they see everybody who comes as a rich foreign tourist, and then they don't realize, well, hold on, maybe some people really want to just know you. Right, you know, they want to get past that facade of just being like just being a cash cow. They actually want to come and, like, you know, they're interested in who you are, what you do, and everything like that. You know.
Yeah. People who are interested in that generally don't come in tour groups. They come individually, and they probably meet somebody in Aswan, a Nubian in Aswan. And they have rapport with that person in Aswan, and then that Nubian generally then brings that individual to their homes.
Okay, and explain the situation this isn't just somebody to...
Exactly, right, exactly. This person's actually interested in our culture, you know, interested in meeting us, you know, and so that's a different thing.
Okay.
So, but those people generally are not in groups.
Okay. When we went to Elephantine, the chief took us around the village and took us into all different houses, showed us all around, showed us the irrigation channels and like where their groves were and everything like that. And, you know, I mean, that was unexpected because we'd actually gone to see the museum, and he met us off the boat, and he said, before you go there, you have to come and see around the village.
Wow.
And he took us all the way around and everything, and showed us different things. And we sat there for about 2-3 hours just talking to them.
Yeah.
And I mean, another thing they had paintings that people had done that they wanted people outside, like in Europe or America, they wanted them to organize exhibitions for the artist's work. And then obviously, like, you know, the artist's work sell, then you send back down a part of the money to the village. You know, so they were doing that as well. So, like, because, I mean, you know, like work that, you know, somebody can just do sitting down in a Nubian village, obviously they want like a higher price for it once it goes outside.
Yeah, it's
Egypt.
a way to make money. Yeah, great.
So they were doing that as well.
And this is an Elephantine?
Yeah, they showed us a catalogue, and they told us that a German man had already organised something. But But they wanted to know if we wanted to do it. But in a way, you have to know what you're doing, because A, you don't want to take somebody's work and it don't sell.
That's true.
And
That's true.
B, but because it was just the first time, like we'd literally just come off the boat and met them. And after we'd sat with them for about an hour and a half and they were showing us all the different crafts and everything, then the chief just started showing us all the paintings that he's got, like a catalogue of the paintings.
Wow.
And he says, like, these are the paintings that we have. Like, what we do is, you arrange to get them back to your country, set up an exhibition, and then obviously you set up a sale, and then you send us back down the money, or you bring back down the money. So,
Very, very trusting on their part, isn't it?
the chief's a smart cookie. He's not a chief for nothing. So, he's good at working out people, and obviously he's looking at it that if you do it right, then you've got access to a Nubian village, right? You've
Yes.
got, so it's like, so
Yes.
it's as much, you could think you're smart and run off with a couple of £100 worth of paintings, but you couldn't come back to the village, so it
That's
wouldn't make
true.
any sense.
Yeah.
And he's the chief of, when you land on Elephantine, that's his village right there, so you can't come back to that area.
At all. Right, that's true. You're right.
So he's not stupid, because he knows
Yeah.
people want to come to the museum. You offer that opportunity to people, but we never really took it up because it was the first time that we
Sure.
kind of met him, and you don't really want to get into that until you know exactly what the ins and outs are. And I mean, issues come up about damaged paintings and you know what I mean, everything
Getting
like
them
that.
through customs. Do you
Yeah.
know how to do that? Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, customs
Sure.
might charge you more than
Oh, yeah. Then you'll be able to sell the paintings for.
because you have to make sure they're boxed up properly and everything
Yeah.
like that. But
Yeah.
but they weren't big paintings. Some of them were just A3 size, and things like that, just on paper. You see, some I don't know. Some of the way he was talking was like he would just roll them up and you frame them in your country so that it's easier to ship them. Things like that.
Okay. Yeah. But also, there's a possibility that you might know somebody who's willing to do that.
Yeah.
You might not be willing, but you might meet, a gallery owner in London who is willing to do that.
Yeah. So that was
Pass
part.
the information along. Yeah.
Yeah, that was part of what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Right, you touched on what brought you to the UK was to talk about tourism. Yeah. So what else roughly will you be talking about?
That's basically it. I mean, we only have 20 minutes to give our lecture. So
Okay.
I'm going to be talking about the changes and basically they're, these, I call them fake houses, but they're Nubian they're newly built houses, but they look like the old traditional Nubian style houses. And they bring the tourists to those rather than taking them to the private homes that Nubians actually live in.
Yeah.
And they have things to sell. Well, you went through one in Elephantine, so
Went
you
through
know
more
exactly
than one.
Okay. So
Took
you
us to
know what
about
I
4.
mean? Oh God! Clothing hanging on the walls. Necklaces and basket lids for sale. T-shirts. That kind of thing. So that's what they're doing in West Aswan also, and that's very new to me. Between 1997 and 2007, that they started building these. So that's basically what I'm talking about. And what I noticed was that it was men who were doing all of this, and the women were no longer meeting the tourists, and they were no longer getting the money from the tourists directly. So my question is, well, is it going to continue that way? Does this mean that women no longer have access to tourist money now, or not?
But I mean, surely doing things like the henna painting and all that is going to be done by women.
That's good, yeah. But in the past, women did all of everything, and they got all the money. Now they're sharing the money with the men of the family. So what does that mean? That's all I'm asking.
Okay, that sounds interesting. So what else are you working on now?
That's the last thing that I worked on. I'm retired, so I don't have to work on anything now, so.
What message would you like to leave people with about the Nubians of West Aswan, or Nubian life generally?
It was a life that I really enjoyed living. I liked it very much, even though it was hard. They had a way of being family-oriented that I think we're losing in the West. Family for them is the most important thing. And so, if they have to give something up for a family member, a sister or a brother, they do that, and they do it readily because family is more important than anything else. And I learned that, living there amongst them. And I urge people who travel to go to Aswan and visit the Nubians, and do that before going to Luxor. Do that before even going to Cairo, if possible. Go first to Aswan and then travel north.
So comparing, right, like how you feel in Aswan, right? Because I talked about the first time you went. So when you go back to America after you've been to Aswan, how do you feel when you see the state of African people in America?
Oh, yes, well. Well, I'm afraid that the Nubians are going to become like that too. That the Nubians are going to turn their back on their culture. I mean, already, Nubian women want to straighten their hair. They want to bleach their skin. They want to look more like Europeans, more like, more like American blacks or American whites or Europeans. So they're doing what American blacks were doing in the 1950s, And then we had the Black Power movement, and we stopped for a while. But I think we're doing it again now.
That kind of globalized, urbanized kind of mishmash.
Yeah. That's so that's what I'm afraid of. I'm hoping maybe they won't be doing that, but I'm afraid that they will.
You're one woman trying to stand in the way of. Yeah, that must be how it feel, like you say, no, I've seen all this, I've been through all this, we've had all those discussions, I can come and stop me making that mistake.
Yeah, but
it's like everybody has to live their life.
They have to, they have to go through that, evidently,
You'd rather that, they just jump that experience.
It would be nice, and maybe they will, but I don't know.
What music were the Nubians listening to? Or any artist you could mention?
Let's see. Well, they like American music. At least the first time I was there, they liked James Brown, and they liked Michael Jackson, and there were some European black groups that I had never heard of, but they listened to them. They also listened to Sudanese music. Okay. And the Nubians also have their own Nubian music that they listen to.
Yeah, who were some of their artists? Can you name any?
No, I don't remember now.
Okay.
It was a while ago.
All right, and thanks a lot.
Thank you.
البنات يا كل البشاير تفك في المنام لو ليجي لي زاير يا ست البنات يا كل البشاير تفك في المنام لو يجي لي زاير لو ألقاك جنبي أحس بقلبي طاير لو ألقاك جنبي أحس بقلبي طاير سكر 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 رمش عيونك يا سمار أحلى من العسل أحلى من العسل سكر 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 رمش عيونك يا سمار أحلى من العسل سكر 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 رمش عيونك يا سمار أحلى من العسل أحلى من العسل بنظرة عيونك جننت القلوب والبسمة في شفايفك بيدوبني دوب من نظرة عيونك جننت القلوب والبسمة في شفايفك بيدوبني دوب بنظرة عيونك جننت القلوب والبسمة في شفايفك بيدوبني دوب أنا من حبك انتي ما قادر أتوب أنا من حبك انتي ما قادر أتوب سكر 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 رمش عيونك يا سمار أحلى من العسل أحلى من العسل سكر 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 رمش عيونك يا سمار أحلى من العسل سكر 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 رمش عيونك يا سمار أحلى من العسل أحلى من العسل بنظرة عيونك جننت القلوب والبسمة في شفايفك بيدوبني دوب بنظرة عيونك جننت القلوب والبسمة في شفايفك بيدوبني دوب بنظرة عيونك جننت القلوب والبسمة في شفايفك بيدوبني دوب أنا من حبك انتي ما قادر أتوب أنا من حبك انتي ما قادر أتوب سكر 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 رمش عيونك يا سمار أحلى من العسل أحلى من العسل سكر 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 رمش عيونك يا سمار أحلى من العسل سكر 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 رمش عيونك يا سمار أحلى من العسل بكل حلة ابشر حبابك يا ود القبيلة 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 حضروا القبايل من كل حلة ابشر حبابك يا ود القبيلة 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 حضروا القبايل بكل حلة ارفع يا عريس سيفك لضيوفك 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 وارسل للقبايل بكل حلة ابشر حبابك يا ود القبيلة 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 حضروا القبايل بكل حلة ارفع يا عريس سيفك لضيوفك 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 وامشي للقبايل بكل حلة الليلة الحنة وبكرة الدخلة الليلة الحنة وبكرة الدخلة الليلة الحنة وبكرة الدخلة زغرت يا بنات يا بنات يا بنات 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 يا بنات العين
Thank you very much. Dankeschön.
مبروك وعرسنا